Another neighborhood kid with an attitude. That's all the judge thinks he sees. Judge Harold Mercer peers down at the 19-year-old black defendant and actually chuckles. The packed courtroom goes still as Darius Coleman stands there in shackles, drowning inside a wrinkled public defender suit a size too big. With a lazy flick of his wrist, Mercer waves him off like shooing a mosquito. Son, cut the performance. This isn't courtroom TV, and you're not a star. The white prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Blake Turner, smirks without bothering to hide it. Court officers trade looks, already convinced they know how this story ends. Even the bailiff rolls his eyes when Darius tries to speak. Mercer slices through the air, cutting him off mid-sentence. You're going to prison, boy. Only thing I'm deciding is how long. In the gallery, Darius's mother sits rigid, watching her college-bound son get treated like trash instead of a Harvard admit. Angela Coleman's fingers shake as she clutches the physical proof of everything they sacrificed, his Harvard University acceptance letter, creased from being read too many times. From the bench, Judge Mercer reaches for his gavel, ready to smash this young man's entire future with one theatrical strike. The courtroom holds its breath, already writing Darius off as another statistic. But what happens before that gavel falls will stun every single person in that room. Ever been underestimated so badly they forgot you might be dangerous? 4 months earlier, Darius Coleman stood on a completely different stage under softer lights. As valedictorian of Benjamin Banneker High School, he delivered a graduation speech that pulled more than 300 people to their feet. His voice carried the easy swagger of someone who'd never met a challenge he couldn't beat. We are not chained to our zip code, Darius declared, gesturing toward the rough neighborhood visible through the auditorium doors, daring the world to doubt him. We are the designers of our own future, he continued, each word landing like a promise. Back home, his Harvard acceptance letter hung framed above his desk like a championship banner. Full academic scholarship, pre-law track, straight pipeline toward Harvard Law School. His 1580 SAT score placed him in the top tier nationwide. But Darius had earned something even rarer than test scores, genuine respect from teachers who had watched a quiet ninth grader grow into a brilliant, relentless thinker. While most of his classmates spent summers at the pool, working part-time at the mall, or losing hours to video games, Darius clocked in at the East Baltimore Public Library. 40 hours a week, he shelved books, helped seniors figure out email accounts, and ran reading circles for kids who reminded him of himself at 9. Every paycheck went straight into a savings account because he knew Harvard life required more than tuition. There were travel costs, books, and basic survival to cover. The library wasn't just a job, it became his refuge. After closing, once the last visitor shuffled out and the heavy glass doors clicked shut, Darius claimed his favorite table in the law section. Dense constitutional law texts became his version of bedtime stories. Supreme Court opinions replaced social feeds and highlight reels. His future was sketched in sharp detail already. Become a civil rights lawyer, then come back and fight for people who looked like him and lived where he lived. His mother, Angela Coleman, had willed that dream into existence almost by herself. A registered nurse at Johns Hopkins Hospital, she worked 3 12-hour shifts a week, then grabbed weekend doubles whenever the unit was short. She'd raised Darius alone since his father's sudden heart attack when Darius was 8, pouring every bit of energy into pushing her son beyond their circumstances. You're going to be the first attorney in this family, she'd remind him, usually while studying at the same kitchen table. She'd be cramming for nursing certifications as Darius demolished calculus problems that would stump some undergrads. East Baltimore was not the kind of place people easily escaped. Sagging row houses leaned like broken teeth along cracked sidewalks. Corner stores hid behind thick, bulletproof glass. Sirens sang in the background like a permanent soundtrack. But inside their small apartment, Angela had built something miraculous, an environment where schoolwork was sacred, excuses didn't survive, and dreams were treated like plans instead of fantasies. Everything blew apart on a sticky Thursday night in late August. Darius clocked out of the library at exactly 9 p.m., just like every other evening. The 15-minute walk home took him down familiar blocks he'd crossed safely for nearly 2 decades. His mind wasn't on danger, it was on a Supreme Court case he'd been studying, Miranda versus Arizona. He was still turning over the right to remain silent in his head when blue police lights suddenly washed the sidewalk behind him. Officer Daniel Harris stepped out of the squad car with his hand already resting on his radio, posture radiating assumption. No relation to Darius, of course, just one of those dark coincidences life throws at you when you least deserve it. "Hold up right there," the officer commanded, voice steeped in 30 years of unquestioned authority. "Good evening, officer," Darius answered, polite out of muscle memory. His mother had drilled the rules into him, hands visible, respectful tone, never give them an excuse. 3 blocks away, Patel's Corner Mart had been robbed at gunpoint less than half an hour earlier. The suspect description: young black male, about 6 feet tall, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap. Darius stood 5'9" in a bright yellow library staff shirt, carrying a backpack full of textbooks and his employee badge clipped to the strap. But what Officer Harris saw wasn't what stood in front of him. He saw what he expected. "Turn around. Hands on the car," the officer snapped. "Sir, there's got to be some kind of mistake," Darius started, keeping his voice even. Before he could finish, store owner Raj Patel jogged around the corner, breathing hard from the run. He took one look at Darius under the street lamp and pointed, his finger shaking. "That's him. That's the guy who robbed me." The world seemed to lurch sideways. "Mr. Patel, it's Darius. I help your niece with her scholarship essays at the library," he pleaded, disbelief cracking his voice. Patel's eyes didn't show confusion. They showed something worse: absolute certainty. "I know who I saw," he insisted, voice firm for the benefit of the officer. "He matches exactly." The cuffs clicked shut around Darius's wrists, cold metal biting into warm skin. As Officer Harris guided him into the back of the cruiser, Darius watched his carefully planned future dissolve like ink in water. Harvard, law school, the dream of becoming a civil rights lawyer, all of it disappearing behind that cage of steel and flashing blue. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the courthouse interview room, flickering just enough to feel hostile. Shadows clung to the corners and stretched across the dented metal table. Darius sat opposite his court-appointed lawyer, Ethan Morales, a man buried alive under files and cheap coffee. Morales's tie hung loose, shirt wrinkled, eyes dull with the resignation of someone who'd been losing to the system for years. "Listen carefully, Darius," Morales began without looking up from the thick folder in his hands. "Judge Mercer sent 3 kids to adult prison last week alone. One of them was on the honor roll. Didn't matter." His tone was flat, like he'd delivered this speech 100 times. Darius leaned forward despite the cuffs, voice steady, even while his chest churned. "Mr. Morales, there's security footage from the library, time-stamped. It shows me at the reference desk at the exact time that robbery supposedly happened." For the first time, Morales looked up, brows lifting with tired skepticism. "Kid, I've heard that story more times than I can count," he sighed. "Everybody's innocent. Everybody's got an alibi. Everybody swears there's evidence that'll magically fix everything." Darius shook his head. "This isn't a story. It's video." Morales snapped the folder shut, the sound cracking through the room. "This is adult felony court. Armed robbery carries a mandatory minimum of 3 to 5 years. Mercer doesn't care about your GPA or Harvard dreams. He cares about conviction numbers and re-election flyers." The public defender pulled out a plea form, already half-filled. 18 months in state prison, probably out in 12 with good behavior," he said, sliding it across the table. "Take it and someday you'll thank me." Darius stared at the paper that would label him a violent felon forever. "You're asking me to confess to something I didn't do," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to be realistic about a machine that grinds up kids like you and never looks back," Morales replied. His voice carried the weight of countless lost cases. I've got 200 plus files on my desk. I can spend 15 minutes on yours and keep you under 2 years, or I can spend 3 hours and watch you get 5. Your call. A strange cold settled in Darius's gut. This wasn't justice. This was a conveyor belt moving human beings toward cages. I need time, he whispered. Morales was already packing up, shrugging. You've got until tomorrow morning. After that, the deal disappears. The door clanged shut behind him, leaving Darius alone with the echo of an impossible choice. That night, he sat at his battered bedroom desk, staring at his laptop until the screen blurred. The Harvard admissions portal displayed a message that landed like a punch. Due to pending felony charges, his admission had been revoked, effective immediately. 4 years of perfect grades, hundreds of volunteer hours, top-tier test scores. All of it wiped out with one cold, automated notification. Angela appeared in the doorway, still wearing her scrubs, wrinkled from another 12-hour shift saving strangers. She read the screen over his shoulder, and Darius watched the hope drain from her face in real time. All those nights you were up studying while I was pulling doubles, she whispered, voice trembling. All those mornings I left before sunrise, knowing you'd be right here doing homework when I got back. She lowered herself onto his bed, suddenly looking 10 years older than she had yesterday. I already took out a second mortgage, she admitted quietly. Used your college fund to try to hire a private attorney, but they want $15,000 more than we have. Darius turned toward her, seeing each line of exhaustion around her eyes. Mom, what if I told you I could represent myself? He asked. Angela stared at him like she'd misheard. Darius, this isn't some school debate tournament. This is adult prison on the table, she said, fear sharpening each word. I know, he replied, gesturing to the stacks of law books on his desk. But what if the lawyer they give us doesn't believe I'm innocent? What if the only person willing to really fight for Darius Coleman is me? Angela had raised her son to trust hard work, education, and the basic fairness of American institutions. Now sitting in his cramped bedroom, watching 18 years of effort disintegrate, she felt that faith shake for the first time. Administration called me into the office today, she confessed. They're worried about public perception. A nurse whose son is charged with a felony doesn't look good on their brochure. Each word hit Darius like a physical blow. His case wasn't just dragging down his future, it was stripping away everything his mother had built. Down the hall, their neighbor Mrs. Franklin started turning up her television volume whenever Angela walked past. The whispers followed like smoke through the building. I always thought that boy was too smart for his own good. College doesn't erase what's in your blood. Angela acted better than everyone, but look at her son now. Rumors shredded their carefully earned reputation in less than 3 days. That night, Darius used the library key his supervisor had trusted him with. Once the building emptied and the lights dimmed, he slipped inside. Surrounded by legal databases and dusty law reporters, he began researching a right he'd never thought about. The Sixth Amendment guaranteed him an attorney, but buried deeper in Supreme Court precedent, Darius discovered something else, the right to reject that attorney and speak for himself. Farida Vera's California, 1975. The court had ruled that a defendant could insist on self-representation, even if every lawyer in the room thought it was foolish. Darius pulled up the case file details, taking notes. Then he turned to his own file, Patel's statement, Harris's report, and the timeline that didn't quite fit. Patel originally told Dispatch the robber was around 6 feet, stocky, with a full beard, wearing a red cap. Darius was 5'9", skinny, could barely grow stubble, and didn't even own a red hat. Yet Officer Harris's official report somehow described the suspect as about 5'9", slim, clean-shaven, in dark clothes, with no hat mentioned. The description had magically shifted to match Darius almost perfectly. He cross-checked the police timestamps with the library's security logs, heart-pounding as he compared. The robbery was reported at 9:47 p.m., according to Patel's statement. But library records showed Darius checking out books for patrons until 9:52 with digital timestamps that didn't lie. Someone had clearly bent the timeline to make the accusation stick. Darius leaned back, staring at the papers spread across the table. For the first time since his arrest, something besides despair sparked in his chest. If the system wouldn't fight for him, then he'd just have to become his own weapon. He pulled out his phone and dialed Morales. "Mr. Morales, it's Darius. I've decided about the plea," he said. The attorney sounded almost relieved. "Smart move, kid. I'll file it first thing tomorrow." Darius swallowed. "No, sir, I'm not taking the deal, and I'm dismissing you as my counsel." Silence stretched across the line. 10 long seconds of stunned disbelief. "Son, you are about to make the worst mistake of your life," Morales finally replied, voice losing its practiced calm. Darius stared at the Harvard letter still hanging on his wall, now nothing more than an expensive piece of paper. "Maybe," he said softly, "but if it's a mistake, it'll be mine." The next morning, the small courthouse conference room felt like a tomb. Darius sat across from Morales again. The plea deal opened between them like a loaded weapon. 3 signatures, and his future would be locked into the words printed across the bottom. Guilty to armed robbery. Waiver of appeal. "Last chance," Morales warned, tapping the signature line with his pen. 18 months. You'll be out before your 21st birthday. That's young enough to rebuild something. Darius stared at the page that would officially turn him into a criminal on paper. The sentences blurred together. Phrases about guilt, waivers, and permanent records. "I can't sign a document that calls me a robber when I'm not," he answered, voice no louder than normal but somehow unshakable. "Every background check for the rest of my life will scream felon. Every job, every apartment, every opportunity," he added. Morales leaned back, studying him like he was some unsolvable equation. "You think you're the first bright kid to sit in that chair? Mercer has buried honor students before." "He'll do it again," he said. Darius slid a thick manila folder across the table. "What if I told you I found evidence?" he asked. "Evidence that doesn't just help me? It proves I'm innocent. Morales didn't even open it." "I'd tell you the truth doesn't always matter here," he said. "Innocent people sit in cells every day because they thought evidence weighed more than politics and fear. This is about numbers, headlines, and keeping the neighborhood feeling safe." Darius tried again. "But what if—" "No what ifs," Morales snapped, rising from his chair. "I'm filing this agreement with or without you. The judge expects it on his desk within the hour." Darius watched his supposed advocate pack up like it was just another Tuesday. This was the man who was supposed to stand between him and prison, who was supposed to believe him when nobody else did. "Mr. Morales," Darius said, heart pounding, "I'm invoking my constitutional right to represent myself." The lawyer froze, briefcase halfway closed. "Say that again," he demanded. "Ferretta Veris, California," Darius replied. "The Supreme Court said I have the right to self-representation, even if it's a bad idea." His voice gained strength with each word. "I'm using that right. I'm formally letting you go." For the first time, Morales looked at him like he was more than a case number. "You have absolutely no clue what you're walking into," he said quietly. "This isn't a classroom. This is a place where professional prosecutors make careers out of destroying people like you." Darius closed the folder in front of him. "Then I guess I'd better learn faster than they expect." Morales shook his head slowly, like he was watching someone step off a ledge. "Your funeral, kid," he muttered. "Maybe literally." The door slammed behind him. That night, Darius turned his cramped bedroom into a war room. Constitutional law case books towered on his desk like city skyscrapers. Yellow legal pads covered with frantic notes lined the walls. His laptop screen overflowed with browser tabs. Criminal rules, evidence standards, cross-examination techniques, courtroom etiquette. He had 72 hours to cram 3 years of law school. The East Baltimore Public Library doubled as his classroom and sanctuary. After his regular shift, Darius would drag his rolling backpack to a corner table in the law section and vanish into a world of page numbers and citations. He devoured trial transcripts the way other people binged shows, episode after episode, night after night. Every new case taught him something: how lawyers framed their opening, how they poked holes in testimony, how they pulled threads together during their final argument. He learned that trials were theater, but theater with strict rules. Opening statements set the storyline. Cross-examinations were where lies went to die. Closing arguments stitched the evidence into a story the jury could believe. Most importantly, he learned that the entire weight of proof sat on the prosecution's shoulders. They had to prove he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. He didn't have to prove innocence. He just had to show the doubt already hiding in the details. And the details were starting to whisper. The police report claimed Officer Harris responded within minutes of the 911 call, but the dispatch logs Darius pulled from Discovery showed a 40-minute gap between the emergency call and the officer's arrival. What had Harris been doing all that time? Patel's first description of the robber didn't look like Darius at all. Yet by the time the official report was filed, the suspect might as well have been wearing a name tag that said Darius. The most damning timeline came from the library itself. Security footage showed Darius behind the reference desk, helping patrons until 9:52 p.m., checking books in and out with timestamps burned into the system. The robbery, according to the charge documents, happened at 9:47. Unless Darius had learned to clone himself, something in the state's story was a lie. He laid the papers across his bedroom floor like puzzle pieces, searching for a pattern, a picture of what really happened. Slowly, painstakingly, that pattern started to appear. 3 days before trial, Darius sat at the kitchen table with Angela, reading his opening statement aloud for the 10th time. She watched her son deliver lines about presumption of innocence and reasonable doubt with the same intensity he'd once reserved for AP exams. "Baby, are you absolutely sure?" she asked, barely holding back tears. "It's not too late to call that lawyer back. Let him do this the normal way." Darius looked up from his notes, determination hardening his features. "Mom, what did you always teach me?" he asked. "Stand up straight. Look people in the eye. Tell the truth," she replied automatically. "That's all I'm planning to do. Except this time I'm saying it to a jury," he said. Angela had spent 19 years raising a son who didn't bend easily. She'd watched him survive brutal classes, win academic competitions, and push past every limit they'd tried to place on him. "Win or lose, I'm proud of you," she said finally, voice thick. "Proud of the man you've become." That evening, the prosecutor's office called the apartment. District Attorney Leonard Collins himself came on the line, his tone smooth and practiced. "Mr. Coleman, I'm willing to extend a very generous offer," he began. "Plead guilty to misdemeanor theft. You walk out with time served and some community service. No prison, no felony record, no need to roll the dice at trial." Darius felt the weight of the offer hit him like a physical object. One word, yes, and this whole nightmare would wrap up neatly. He could reapply to other schools, maybe eventually to Harvard again. He could try to rebuild his name before it was completely ruined. But accepting meant agreeing that what happened to him was fair. It meant pretending Patel and Harris had simply made a harmless mistake, not a choice. It meant swallowing every principle Angela had drilled into him. "I appreciate the offer, sir," Darius said, hands shaking slightly around the phone. "But I'll see you in court tomorrow." Collins let out a short, humorless laugh. "Son, I've been dismantling defendants for 2 decades. I know exactly how this goes," he replied. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Darius glanced at his wall, where the Harvard letter still hung beside a fresh sheet of trial notes. 2 futures stared back at him. One easy, one honest. "I'm not trying to make it hard," Darius replied quietly. "I'm trying to make it right." Later that night, he sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by stacks of paper. Police reports, witness statements, receipts, printouts of case law, his life reduced to piles of documents. His eyes burned with fatigue, but something in the evidence kept nagging at him, a detail that refused to sit still. He opened Officer Harris's official report and Patel's original 911 transcript side by side. The differences were impossible to miss once he forced himself to slow down and really read. Patel told the dispatcher, young black male, roughly 6 feet, heavy build, full beard, red baseball cap, dark jacket. Harris's report described the suspect as approximately 5'9", slim, clean-shaven, wearing dark clothing, and no hat at all. Somewhere between the call and the report, the robber had shed height, weight, and facial hair, and conveniently lost that bright red cap. Or the story had been rewritten. Darius grabbed a highlighter and began marking every mismatch between the two accounts. This wasn't about minor memory slips. These were full-blown contradictions. Height, 6 foot versus 5'9". Build, heavy versus thin. Facial hair, full beard versus clean-shaven. Headwear, specific red baseball cap versus nothing on his head. But the real punch came when he widened his search. Darius logged into the courthouse database and started looking up other cases tied to Officer Harris and Raj Patel. What he found made his heart race and his palms sweat. Over the last 3 years, Harris had filed virtually identical arrest reports in case after case. Not just similar, practically copy and paste jobs. Same phrasing, same sequence of events, same heroic officer language with only names and dates swapped out. Darius cross-checked those case numbers with Patel's insurance claims and store records. Every single incident happened within a couple blocks of Patel's corner store, and every single suspect looked like him. Young black men, usually between 16 and 20, most of them college-bound or holding scholarships. Every case ended not with a trial, but with a plea bargain that kept everything quiet and tidy. Then Darius dug into the insurance side. Patel had filed claims for stolen goods in 12 of those 15 arrests, thousands of dollars worth of merchandise that never showed up as missing in any official police report. He pulled up a calculator app and started adding the payouts together. $47,000 over 3 years, almost $16,000 a year, all backed by paperwork that looked legitimate on its face. This wasn't random mistake territory anymore. This smelled like a racket. Darius grabbed his phone and dialed a number he'd saved, but never actually used. A journalist's line from a local investigative segment he watched religiously. It went straight to voicemail, just like he expected at that hour. He took a breath and started talking before he lost courage. "This is Darius Coleman," he said. "I know it's late, but I've uncovered something serious involving an officer and a store owner. The police reports don't match the 911 calls. The insurance claims don't match what was allegedly stolen. This isn't one robbery. It looks like an ongoing scheme targeting young black men with bright futures." His voice shook, but he kept going. "I'm sending you documents. Please look at them. I go to trial tomorrow, and this needs to see daylight." He hung up and stared at the mountain of paper around him. For weeks, Darius had believed he was fighting a single false accusation. Now he understood he'd stumbled onto something much bigger, a pattern of corruption that had steamrolled other kids before him. Patel and Harris weren't just cutting corners, they were predators who turned the justice system into their own personal cash machine. Their favorite targets? Young men like Darius with scholarships on the line and everything to lose. They bet those kids would plead out rather than risk a public trial that might scare colleges away. For years they'd been right, but Darius was the miscalculation in their equation. He wasn't going to vanish quietly into a cell. He was going to drag their whole operation into the light, right in front of a jury, a judge, and whoever else cared to show up. The decision settled in his chest like armor. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about saving himself. It would be about exposing them. Morning came too soon, the sky a dull gray as Darius walked up the courthouse steps. In one hand, he carried his late father's worn leather briefcase, the handle darkened by years of use. In the other, He dragged a rolling cart stacked high with labeled binders, color-coded tabs spilling from the edges. Word had already spread through East Baltimore overnight. The valedictorian from Banneker was going to stand up in adult felony court without a lawyer. Local news vans lined the curb, satellite dishes stretching upward like metallic trees. Reporters clustered near the entrance, rehearsing on-camera intros about the teen genius defending himself. Some people came out just to watch, curious or skeptical, or quietly rooting for him. Darius paused for half a second at the base of the steps, feeling every eye on him, every whispered bet about how badly this would go. Then he squared his shoulders, tightened his grip on the briefcase, and started climbing. "Son, I've been tearing defendants apart in that courtroom for 20 years, Collins said, voice low and smug. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Darius looked at the Harvard letter framed above his desk, its fancy crest watching over stacks of case notes. Two futures stared back at him, one paved with compromise, the other with risk. "Sir," he answered, "I'm not trying to make this hard. I'm trying to make it right." At 2 in the morning, Darius sat on his bedroom floor, cross-legged in the middle of chaos. Police reports, witness statements, store receipts, dispatch logs, and library records sprawled out around him like some twisted paper labyrinth. His eyes stung from hours of cross-checking timelines and scribbling notes in the margins. Something wouldn't stop tugging at his brain, a stubborn detail that refused to fit the version of events everyone else seemed so eager to accept. He opened his laptop and pulled up Officer Harris's incident report, then Patel's original 911 call, transcripts side by side. The contrast made his stomach knot. In the call, Patel told the operator, "Young black male, around 6 feet, heavy set, full beard, red baseball cap, dark jacket." Darius read the lines twice, then 3 times. The language felt raw, rushed, like someone actually describing what they believed they'd seen in the heat of the moment. Harris's official report read like it came from a different universe. The suspect was now approximately 5'9", thin build, clean-shaven, wearing dark clothing, no headwear observed. Darius stared at both descriptions, bouncing his eyes back and forth. Somewhere between the frantic 911 call and the polished paperwork, the robber had magically shrunk, lost 40 pounds, shaved his beard, and tossed the red cap. Or more likely, the story had been carefully rewritten to match whoever Harris decided to arrest. Darius grabbed a yellow highlighter and went to work, marking every clash between the two accounts. These weren't harmless memory slips. They were full-on contradictions. Height, 6 feet versus 5'9". Build, heavy versus slim. Facial hair, full beard versus clean-shaven. Headwear, bright red cap versus none at all. The more he highlighted, the clearer it became. Someone had bent reality on paper, forcing facts to line up neatly around his name, his height, his face, his life. But that wasn't even the worst part. Darius logged into the courthouse's online database and started digging for other cases, listing both Officer Daniel Harris and store owner Raj Patel. What he found made his hands shake with equal parts fury and adrenaline. Over the past 3 years, Harris had filed nearly identical arrest reports in 15 different cases. Not similar, not vaguely alike, practically carbon copies, right down to certain suspiciously familiar phrases and heroic details. Same basic suspect description, same vague, furtive movements, same miraculous identification by Patel, same tidy sequence of events, copied and pasted with only names, dates, and a few minor details swapped out. Darius cross-referenced those case numbers with Patel's store logs and insurance paperwork. Every arrest took place within a couple of blocks of the corner mart. Every time, the alleged crime conveniently justified Patel locking in another chunk of money from his insurance carrier. A sick pattern emerged. Every arrested suspect was a young black man between 16 and 20, most of them listed as students. Darius dug deeper and saw scholarship mentions tucked into pre-sentencing reports and school records. These weren't random kids off the corner. They were college bound, with something massive to lose, and every single one of those cases avoided trial. Each ended in a quiet plea bargain, signed under pressure, buried in the system, then forgotten by everyone else. Then Darius opened the insurance claims summaries. Patel had reported stolen merchandise in 12 of the 15 cases: electronics, cigarettes, lottery scratch offs, even prepaid phone cards. But those items didn't always show up in the official police paperwork as recovered, logged, or verified missing. He pulled out his phone, opened the calculator app, and began adding the payout amounts line by line. Each number pushed his heart rate higher as the total climbed and refused to slow down. By the time he finished, the total hovered around $47,000 in 3 years, almost 16 grand a year flowing from insurance companies into Patel's accounts, all propped up by Harris's reports. This wasn't clumsy mistake territory anymore. This looked like a full-blown scam run through the machinery of the justice system. Darius picked up his phone with trembling fingers, suddenly understanding that his arrest wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was just one more transaction in their scheme. He dialed a number he'd saved months ago after watching a local investigative reporter expose a corrupt landlord, straight to voicemail, like he expected. "This is Darius Coleman," he began, voice shaky but clear. "I know it's late, but I've uncovered something serious involving Officer Daniel Harris and Raj Patel. The police reports don't match the 911 calls. The insurance claims don't match what was allegedly stolen. This isn't about one robbery. It's about a pattern of exploitation. I'm emailing documents right after this," he continued. "Please review them. I go to trial soon, but this isn't just my life on the line." He ended the call and set the phone down, staring at the mountain of paperwork around him. For weeks, he'd thought he was just trying to clear his own name. Now he saw the truth. He had tripped over a conspiracy that had crushed other kids long before anyone ever slapped cuffs on him. Patel and Harris weren't just lazy or careless. They were predators who had turned arrests into a revenue stream. They had chosen their targets carefully: black teenagers with scholarships and futures, kids most likely to plead guilty to save their education and avoid headlines. Darius might have been their latest mark, but he was also their miscalculation, because unlike the others, he wasn't going to fade quietly into a plea deal. He intended to drag everything into open court. When morning came, the air outside the courthouse buzzed with restless energy as Darius climbed the wide stone steps. His father's old leather briefcase swung from one hand, scuffed but solid. With the other, he pulled a rolling cart stacked with binders, color-coded tabs jutting out like flags. Word had spread through East Baltimore overnight. The Banneker valedictorian was representing himself in adult felony court. News vans lined the street, cameras pointed toward a day of vindication or disaster. Darius wore his late father's only suit, carefully taken in by his mother so it hugged his slimmer frame. The deep navy fabric carried memory and expectation, making the 19-year-old look more like a young attorney than a defendant. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harold Mercer glanced up from his coffee with a smirk. "Mr. Coleman, I assume you've come to your senses about this self-representation nonsense." Darius stood. "No, Your Honor. I'm moving forward on my own, fully prepared to defend myself." His voice cut across the crowded room with more power than anyone expected. "I'm ready to proceed, Your Honor." Mercer's eyebrows inched upward as he took in the crisp suit, neatly stacked binders, and color-coded tabs. This wasn't the usual train wreck he saw when defendants went pro se. "Very well. But understand, this court won't bend its rules because you lack a bar license." Darius nodded. "I wouldn't ask for anything different, Your Honor." At the prosecution table, District Attorney Leonard Collins lounged in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who'd ended hundreds of criminal cases, including several where defendants foolishly chose to represent themselves. In his mind, Darius was just another naive kid about to understand the hard way why lawyers exist. When the clerk finished swearing in the jury, Darius rose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, speaking without notes, Over the next few days, you'll watch one of two stories unfold. Either you'll see an innocent man railroaded for a crime he didn't commit, he continued, or you'll watch a long-running criminal scheme finally dragged into the light. The courtroom went utterly still. The state will tell you, I robbed Raj Patel's corner store on the night of August 24th. They'll put Mr. Patel on that stand to point at me. They'll wave around police reports describing me as some impulsive kid who threw away his future for a few crumpled bills. Darius paused, letting that image hang in the air while he made slow, steady eye contact with each juror. But here's what you won't hear from them, he said quietly. You won't hear that at the exact time of this supposed robbery, I was 3 blocks away working at the East Baltimore Public Library. You won't hear how the suspect description mysteriously shifted between the 911 call and the police report. And you certainly won't hear about Mr. Patel's repeated insurance claims. Over the last 3 years, he added, those claims track suspiciously close to young black men with scholarships and college plans. Collins shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is arguing facts, not in evidence. Mercer nodded. Sustained. Mr. Coleman, keep your opening to what you intend to prove, not closing arguments. Darius inclined his head. Of course, Your Honor. He turned back to the jury. The evidence will show this case isn't about a convenience store robbery. It's about fraud, abuse of power, and who gets targeted. The jurors were locked in. A trio of women in the front row leaned forward, pens hovering over their notepads. An older man in the back watched with an expression that looked more intrigued than doubtful. Darius finished his opening and sat briefly, then rose again. Your Honor, the defense calls Raj Patel to the stand. Collins blinked, surprised. Defense lawyers didn't usually start with the prosecution's star witness, but Darius wasn't following anyone's playbook but his own. Patel walked to the witness stand with the easy swagger of a man who'd spent years being believed on sight. He'd testified in plenty of similar cases, and the pattern had always favored him: plea deals, quick convictions, or frightened defendants who accepted whatever the state offered. After he was sworn in, Darius approached with a relaxed, almost conversational tone. Mr. Patel, earlier you testified that you observed the person you say robbed you for several minutes before he entered your store, correct? That's right, Patel answered. You said you watched him pacing outside, looking nervous? Darius continued. Yes, he was clearly up to something. So during those minutes, you got a good look at him? Very good. My eyesight's perfect, Patel boasted. Darius picked up a printed transcript from his table. Mr. Patel, this is your 911 call from that night. You described the suspect as about 6 feet tall, heavy build, full beard. Do you remember giving that description? Patel shifted, his confidence flickering. It was dark, hard to be exact, yet you were sure enough to tell the dispatcher about 6 feet, Darius said. So you weren't just guessing wildly, Patel shrugged. It was an estimate. Darius reached into his briefcase and, to several jurors' surprise, pulled out a measuring tape. Mr. Patel, would you stand next to me for a moment so the jury can see our heights? Collins objected, but Mercer waved it off. Overruled. Let's see where this goes. Patel stood, clearly over 6 feet himself. Darius extended the tape, then turned back to the jury. I'm 5'9", he said. Mr. Patel is obviously several inches taller. Are you telling this jury that in your perfect observation, you mixed someone my height up with someone roughly your own? Patel swallowed. Like I said, it was dark outside. The robbery happened at 9:47 p.m. in late August, Darius replied. The sun sets after 8, and your store floods the sidewalk with fluorescent light. Are you now telling us visibility was poor? Beads of sweat gathered at Patel's hairline. I know what I saw, he insisted. Darius flipped through his notes. In that same 911 call, you described the suspect as having a full beard. I've been clean-shaven my entire life. How do you account for that? People shave, Patel muttered. Maybe he shaved afterward. In the 15 minutes between your call and the arrest? Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Even Collins looked uneasy. Darius pressed on. You also mentioned a red baseball cap. I don't own one and none was recovered. Where did that bright red cap go? Darius asked. I don't know. Maybe he ditched it, Patel replied, sounding less certain by the second. Along with 40 pounds and a beard? Someone in the gallery snickered before Mercer shot them a warning stare. Darius let the moment breathe, then stepped back. Patel's once solid story had visible cracks now, and Darius had barely touched the deeper evidence. No further questions for now, Your Honor, he said, but I reserve the right to recall this witness later. Collins rose for redirect, but his posture betrayed his frustration. His reliable witness had just been publicly undercut by a 19-year-old in his father's suit with a binder full of notes. After a few weak attempts to rehab Patel's testimony, Collins sat down, jaw tight. Mercer's gavel smacked the wood, sounding like a gunshot in the tense air. We'll break for 30 minutes, he announced. Court will reconvene at 2 o'clock. As he disappeared into chambers, the room erupted into hushed, incredulous chatter. Darius had just shredded Patel's credibility in front of 12 jurors and a courtroom full of neighbors, but everyone knew this was just the first round. At the prosecution table, Collins leaned in close to his two assistants and Officer Daniel Harris. Their voices were low, but their panic showed in the way they moved. Darius stacked his files neatly, acting absorbed in his paperwork while his ears stayed locked onto their conversation. Chaos at that table was exactly what he'd been working toward. Collins jabbed a finger at the legal brief Darius had filed that morning. How does a 19-year-old kid pull better case law than half my staff? He hissed. One of the junior prosecutors shrugged helplessly. Harris tugged at his collar. Sweat glistened along his temple despite the cool air. He's got something, the officer muttered. The way he kept circling the response times, the descriptions, the insurance. He knows more than he's showing. Collins narrowed his eyes. What exactly did you put in that report, Harris? Standard language, Harris replied too quickly. Same as always. Collins' head snapped toward him. And what does same as always mean exactly? He asked, voice tight. Darius pretended to highlight a line in his notes while memorizing every word. The state's team was unraveling in plain view, and they didn't realize half the courtroom could read body language. Across the aisle, spectators leaned toward each other, whispering about the kid who'd just gone toe-to-toe with the system and scored the first blow. Out in the hallway, Angela stood surrounded by neighbors, co-workers, and church members who had come to support her son. Ms. Green from upstairs clutched Darius's arm. Baby, you made that man look ridiculous in there, she said, wiping at her eyes. But are you sure you know what you're doing? Before he could answer, Collins appeared like a shark scenting blood. His campaign smile looked polished enough to cut. Mr. Coleman, could I speak with you privately for a moment? He asked smoothly. Angela stepped closer, instinctively positioning herself between Darius and the prosecutor. Anything you need to say to my son, you say right here, she said firmly. Collins kept the smile, but his eyes went flat. Mrs. Coleman, I'm actually trying to protect your son from a colossal mistake, he said. Darius squeezed his mother's hand lightly. It's okay, Mom, he murmured. They stepped into a small conference room off the hallway. Collins shut the door with exaggerated care, the click echoing a little too loudly. You've put on quite a performance, son, Collins began, leaning back like he owned the room. Very impressive for someone with no formal training. His tone dripped with condescension, like he was complimenting a child's science project. But this isn't a speech competition. This is felony court. Real lives, real careers. Darius met his gaze evenly. Whose career are you worried about, Mr. Collins? Mine or yours? For a brief second, the prosecutor's expression hardened, something predatory flashing behind his eyes. You're in the big leagues now, Collins said quietly. One wrong move, one procedural mistake, one ruling that doesn't go your way, and I'll bury you so deep you'll forget what daylight looks like. Darius tilted his head. Is that a threat directed at a defendant representing himself? He asked. That's seasoned advice from someone who's been doing this since before you were born, Collins replied. He leaned in. Take the deal. Now. Or I promise you'll wish you had. Darius reached into his jacket pocket and tapped his phone screen, stopping a recording app with a soft chime. I appreciate the advice, he said calmly. I'm sure the jury and the ethics board will be very interested in hearing it. Collins went pale. You recorded me? He hissed. Darius shrugged. You approached me, sir. And just so you know, that audio is backed up to the cloud already. The DA straightened his tie with shaky fingers, mask of control slipping. You have no idea what you've started. Actually, Darius replied, opening the door, I'm starting to think I do. He stepped back into the hallway, leaving Collins alone in the tiny room. The DA snatched out his phone and dialed a number. We've got a serious problem, he said as soon as someone picked up. The Coleman kid is not just playing lawyer. He's been digging into us. He knows about the claim patterns, the report changes, maybe even financials. The voice on the other end snapped. Then you'd better make sure none of it sticks. Darius slid into his seat at the defense table with a new calm, radiating a quiet confidence that hadn't been there on the first day of trial. Angela squeezed his shoulder. How bad was it? She whispered. He smiled faintly. Bad for them, he murmured. Real bad. When Mercer returned to the bench, he banged the gavel. Court is back in session, he said. He had no idea the next hour would detonate everything he thought he knew about this simple robbery case. Your Honor, Darius said, rising, the defense recalls Officer Daniel Harris to the stand. The officer walked up with noticeable hesitation, no trace of his earlier swagger. He looked like a man edging across thin ice. Darius had gone easy during the first round of questions. That courtesy was gone now. After Harris was resworn, Darius stepped forward. Officer Harris, earlier you testified that you arrived at the scene within minutes of the 911 call, correct? That's right, Harris replied stiffly. Darius lifted a thick folder. I'd like to introduce the official dispatch logs for August 24th, he said. Collins shot up. Objection, Foundation. These are certified public records obtained through a Freedom of Information request, Darius responded. Officer Harris can identify them as part of standard department tracking. Mercer flipped quickly through the documents, then nodded. They'll be admitted. Proceed, Mr. Coleman. Darius approached the witness with the logs. According to these, the 911 call came in at 9:47 p.m., correct? Yes, Harris said cautiously. And your arrival time? Darius asked. The log shows 10:32 p.m. That's a 45-minute gap, not within minutes, right? Harris shifted in his seat. Dispatch isn't always updated in real time. Sometimes it lags. A 45-minute lag in a system that tracks response times? Darius asked, eyebrows raised. It can happen, Harris insisted. Darius nodded slowly, then picked up another document. Let's look at your incident report. You described the suspect as 5'9", slim, clean-shaven. That accurate? Yes, Harris said. Now let's listen to the 911 call that started this, Darius continued. He pressed play. Patel's panicked voice rang through the courtroom. Young black male, about 6 feet, heavy build, full beard, red baseball cap, dark jacket. When the recording ended, the silence was heavy. Jurors stared at their copies of the transcript, then at Harris. Officer, can you explain how that suspect shrank, lost weight, shaved, and misplaced a bright red cap between the call and your report? Darius asked. Witnesses under stress make mistakes, Harris replied weakly. But you didn't note any confusion in your report, Darius said. You just wrote a completely different description. I followed protocol, Harris muttered. Darius moved to the next folder. Over the last 3 years, how many arrests have you made based on crimes reported by Mr. Patel? He asked. Collins jumped up again. Objection. Relevance. Goes to pattern and credibility, Darius countered. Mercer thought for a moment, then nodded. I'll allow it. Be concise, Mr. Coleman. Darius opened the folder with deliberate care. 15 arrests, he said. 15 young black men between 16 and 20, all within a couple blocks of Mr. Patel's store. That sound about right, officer? Harris swallowed. I patrol a busy sector. Crime is high there. True, Darius said. But what's interesting is that in 12 of those cases, your reports use nearly identical language. Harris frowned. I don't follow. Darius handed photocopies to the bailiff to distribute to the jury. Take a look, he urged. Ladies and gentlemen, Darius said as jurors compared the pages, you'll notice the same phrases repeated, pacing nervously. Approached from the east side, wearing dark clothing, fled westbound, across years of supposed robberies involving different defendants. Jurors' faces shifted from curiosity to unease. Officer, did you individually investigate these incidents? Darius asked. Or did you treat a template report like a fill-in-the-blank form? Harris bristled. I resent that. Then explain how 12 different suspects just happened to behave in copy-paste fashion, Darius pressed. Criminals stick to patterns, Harris said defensively. Interesting, Darius replied, because the patterns don't stop at the police reports. He lifted another set of documents. Are you aware, officer, that Mr. Patel has filed insurance claims totaling approximately $47,000 over those same 3 years? Insurance isn't my job, Harris said. Are you aware that your arrest reports provided the documentation that made those payouts possible? Darius asked. That's between him and his insurance company, Harris answered, visibly rattled. Let's talk about what's between you and Mr. Patel, Darius said softly. He retrieved one last envelope from his briefcase, and Harris visibly stiffened. Your Honor, I move to admit bank statements showing monthly $500 payments from Raj Patel to Officer Daniel Harris's personal account over the last 3 years, he announced. Memo line, security consulting. Total, $18,000. The courtroom exploded into noise. Mercer pounded his gavel. Collins sputtered objections. Harris stared straight ahead, color draining from his face. Officer Harris, Darius said when the room quieted, what security consulting did you provide for $18,000? Harris licked his lips. Legitimate advice, he said. What kind? Darius pressed. Camera placement? Safety drills? Written plans? Harris's silence stretched longer and longer. I want to speak with my attorney, he finally whispered. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Mercer's gavel banged again, but he couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. Harris's 20-year career had just imploded in under 10 minutes. At the prosecution table, Collins rifled through folders like a man searching for a parachute in a burning plane. His star officer had effectively taken the fifth in open court. Darius remained standing at the defense table, steady as a pillar. The boy who'd walked in, facing years in prison, now stood there like someone the system hadn't planned for. A defendant who'd turned himself into his own best advocate. Your Honor, Darius said, voice calm but firm, I have a motion. Mercer eyed him warily. Go ahead, Mr. Coleman. I move for immediate dismissal of all charges, Darius said, on the grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, fabricated evidence, and a complete collapse of the state's case. Mercer leaned back, removing his glasses and cleaning them slowly, that familiar habit signaling he was thinking hard. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop. Everyone watched the judge's face, trying to read how decades on the bench were weighing against what they just witnessed. When Mercer finally looked up, something had changed in his eyes. The condescension from earlier in the week was gone, replaced by open respect. Mr. Coleman, he began, in 35 years of presiding over criminal matters, I've seen all levels of lawyering, competent, excellent, and occasionally extraordinary. He paused, letting the words sink in. What you've done in this courtroom over the past 4 days falls squarely into that last category. A rustle of emotion moved through the gallery. Mercer stood, an act so rare the clerks exchanged glances. You have not only established your own innocence beyond a reasonable doubt, he said, you have exposed a disturbing pattern of corruption operating under the nose of this court. Angela's hand clamped over her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. You have demonstrated preparation, restraint, and ethical judgment that would do any licensed attorney proud. Darius swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs. Accordingly, Mercer continued, voice ringing with authority, all charges against Darius Coleman are dismissed with prejudice. The words hit like a thunderclap. The record will reflect that this dismissal is based on prosecutorial misconduct, falsified or unreliable evidence, and the total failure of the state to present credible proof of guilt. The courtroom erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause. This time Mercer didn't immediately gavel it down. Justice, for once, seemed to be leaning in the defendant's direction. When the noise finally ebbed, Mercer wasn't done. Furthermore, he said, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into Officer Daniel Harris and the business practices of Raj Patel. He glanced toward the back, where internal affairs officers had already slipped in. The evidence we've heard today gives this court probable cause to believe multiple felonies have been committed by those sworn to uphold the law. The words landed heavily. For years, Harris and Patel had controlled the narrative. Now the narrative was turning on them. Two uniformed officers approached the witness stand. Daniel Harris, one announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Harris rose shakily as the cuffs snapped around his wrists, the same hollow metallic click Darius had heard the night his own nightmare began. At the end of the row, Patel was pulled from his seat. Raj Patel, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and filing false statements, the other officer said. Patel's face had gone chalk white. For years, he'd watched young men like Darius led away in cuffs while he stayed behind the counter, untouched. Now he was the one being marched out, his empire of lies collapsing. Cameras flashed as reporters documented every second. In the middle of the chaos, Darius turned slowly to face the crowd, no longer hunched or ashamed. He stood tall, the suit hanging just right, looking less like a former defendant and more like a future advocate. This victory doesn't belong to me alone, Darius said, when a microphone found its way near him and the judge didn't object. His voice carried across the room. It belongs to everyone who refuses to accept injustice as just the way things are. It belongs to every kid who's been underestimated, written off, or told they don't belong in certain rooms. People in the back, neighbors, teachers, old classmates, wiped at their eyes as they listened. For 3 years, Darius continued, Officer Harris and Mr. Patel handpicked young black men with promising futures and turned them into easy statistics. They counted on us being scared, inexperienced, desperate enough to take any deal just to keep a college offer alive. He looked straight at the news cameras. They were sure they could shape our stories for us, but they made one huge miscalculation. He let the silence stretch for a beat. They didn't plan for someone who refused to play along. Applause thundered again, echoing off marble and wood. This time Mercer didn't bother with the gavel. He simply watched, thoughtful, as Darius gathered his files. Outside, phones buzzed non-stop as the story began racing across social media. Clips of the cross-examinations, the bank records, Harris invoking his right to counsel. As Darius stepped into the hallway, his phone vibrated. A new email notification slid into view. Harvard University. Admissions. His stomach flipped as he opened it with shaking hands. Mr. Coleman, the message read, in light of recent developments and your exoneration, we'd like to discuss immediate reinstatement of your admission and a full scholarship to our pre-law program. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Congratulations on your extraordinary achievement. Darius exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He walked out of the courthouse not as the kid the system tried to break, but as someone who had bent that system, however briefly, toward the truth. A year later, crisp October air brushed across Harvard Yard as Darius crossed the grass with a constitutional law casebook tucked under his arm. The same hands that had once trembled while signing criminal paperwork now flew confidently across notebook pages in Professor Elaine Bennett's advanced civil rights seminar. The case that had nearly ended his future had taken on a new life. Coleman Vere's state of Maryland now appeared on syllabi in law schools far from Baltimore. Professors cited it as a modern example of how determined preparation and careful record analysis could expose systemic corruption. Legal journals tore apart the patterns Darius had uncovered: copy-paste reports, insurance fraud, targeted plea deals. Between classes, his phone buzzed with messages from students across the country, kids who'd read about him and suddenly saw their own neighborhoods differently. One afternoon, his screen lit up with a number from the Baltimore Public Defender's office, a contact he'd saved months before. "Darius, this is Monica Alvarez," the voice said. "We've got a case that looks disturbingly similar to yours. 19-year-old honors student, bogus arrest, suspiciously familiar paperwork, different district, same playbook. Would you consider interning with us this summer?" Darius glanced toward the imposing brick of Harvard Law School, where he planned to be in a couple of years. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with purpose. "Email me the file," he said. "I'll start reading tonight." The terrified teenager who had once stared down 5 years in prison had been replaced by a young man who now understood, with razor clarity, what he was meant to do. Every future client, every cross-examination, every corrupt pattern he would help dismantle would trace back to that first choice, saying no to a plea and yes to himself. Later that evening, he clicked open a video call. Angela appeared at her familiar kitchen table, the walls behind her proudly redecorated. 2 frames hung side by side, his reinstated Harvard letter and an official court certificate documenting the dismissal of his charges. "Baby," Angela said, her smile wide enough to light the screen. "That reporter from the cable network called again. They're finishing that documentary. Want another interview." Darius chuckled. "Tell them the same thing I always do, Mom," he said. "This isn't a story about me being some kind of miracle. It's about what happens when regular people stop accepting outrageous injustice as normal." He looked straight into the laptop camera, knowing the clip might end up on some kid's phone in a cramped apartment that looked a lot like his old one. "Maybe you've been told you don't belong in certain schools, certain jobs, certain neighborhoods," he said. "Maybe people expect you to fail before you even start." His tone sharpened with remembered anger. "Maybe you've been underestimated so completely they forgot something important. You can be dangerous when you're prepared." "Here's what I learned," Darius continued. "Your environment doesn't get to write your story. Your reaction does. When they try to shrink you, learn more than they think you can. When they talk over you, speak with so much clarity they can't pretend they didn't hear. When they assume you're ignorant, let your work make them catastrophically wrong." He smiled slightly at that word, remembering Collins's face when the bank records hit the record. "If anything about this story hit home for you," he said, "don't just watch it and move on. Share it with someone who's starting to doubt themselves, someone who's thinking about giving in because the system looks too big." He leaned closer to the camera, voice dropping, but somehow carrying more power. "I promise you this. The world is counting on you to accept the small role it chose for you. You don't have to cooperate. Your potential isn't capped by somebody else's prejudice," Darius said. "Their assumptions about you say way more about them than they do about your ceiling. Their expectations aren't prophecy, they're projections." "And your future?" He shook his head. "Your future belongs to the version of you that refuses to play by their script." On the other end of the call, Angela dabbed at her eyes, proud and amazed but not surprised. She had always known what her son could become, if given half a chance. Outside his dorm window, Students drifted across campus, laughing, balancing coffee cups and textbooks, worrying about exams instead of arraignments. Darius watched them for a moment, then glanced back at the case file from Monica Alvarez that now glowed on his screen. Another kid, another neighborhood, another pattern that looked way too familiar. He rolled up his sleeves. The story that started in a flickering interrogation room in Baltimore was no longer just about survival. It had become the beginning of a mission. And somewhere back home, in a cramped apartment in East Baltimore, a teenager he'd never met scrolled past a video clip of him in that old Navy suit, standing in front of a microphone after his acquittal. They paused, eyes widening as they listened to every word. For them, it wasn't just news, it was proof. Proof that the role they'd been handed wasn't final. Proof that the courtroom, the classroom, the boardroom, those spaces weren't off limits unless they agreed. The clip ended on Darius's face, calm and certain. He hadn't asked to become anyone's symbol. He just refused to surrender his own life. But symbols are built out of moments exactly like that. A kid who wouldn't plead guilty just to make everyone else more comfortable. A mother who refused to walk away. A courtroom that, for once, listened. The rest of his journey, law school, clerkships, cases nobody had heard of yet, would flow from that choice. One day, professors would teach not just the legal holdings of Coleman versus State of Maryland, but the story behind it. The late nights at the library, the shaky phone calls, the charts taped to bedroom walls. Judges would cite it while warning prosecutors about the dangers of blind trust in routine reports. Public defenders would hand copies to clients and say, "Look, the system isn't invincible. We just have to hit it in the right place." Years later, Darius would sit across from young clients who reminded him of himself. Bright eyes, too thin case files, futures hanging by a thread. He'd listen, take notes, and ask questions that drilled past the surface. Sometimes he'd see familiar patterns in the paperwork and feel that old, cold anger flicker to life. And every time he stood up in court after that, some part of him would still be that 19-year-old in his father's suit, betting everything on the truth. But for now, sitting in his dorm room with the glow of his laptop on his face and his mother smiling from 1,000 miles away, Darius felt something he hadn't felt since before the flashing blue lights that changed everything: peace. Not because the fight was over, but because he finally understood his place in it. He wasn't just a survivor of a broken system. He was becoming one of the people determined to fix it, case by case, life by life. "So what are you going to tell that reporter?" Angela asked, bringing him back to the present. Darius laughed softly. "I'll tell her what I always tell everyone," he said. "I'm not the hero of this story. The real heroes are the people who keep showing up. Teachers who push us, neighbors who testify for us, community workers who don't give up on us." He shrugged. "I just happened to be the one holding the mic when the system slipped." He knew some people would still insist he'd just gotten lucky. They'd ignore the hours of preparation, the nights he'd spent surrounded by open books and scribbled notes, the calculated risks. But somewhere, someone would understand that what looked like luck was actually labor, and that realization might be enough to make them open a book or question a report or speak up in a room where everyone expected them to stay quiet. That was more than enough for him. After the call ended, Darius leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the hard courthouse bench, the clank of cuffs, the way the judge had once looked at him like a foregone conclusion. Then he remembered Mercer standing, dismissing the charges with prejudice, publicly acknowledging what Darius had proved. It didn't erase the trauma, but it turned the worst chapter of his life into something else, a launch pad instead of a dead end. His laptop pinged with a new email from Professor Bennett, attaching next week's readings on equal protection and policing. Darius smiled. It felt almost poetic. He opened the document and began to read, highlighter in hand, already thinking about the arguments he'd make in class. The law had nearly crushed him once. Now he was learning to wield it. Not perfectly, not without fear, but with a determination that only survivors truly understand. In the years to come, People would simplify his story into a neat headline: Teen defends himself, uncovers corruption, wins. The reality was messier: sleepless nights, moments of doubt, the constant question of whether he'd made the wrong choice. But he'd learned something essential standing alone at that defense table. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even while fear is screaming in your ear that you're out of your mind. And so whenever a client sat across from him and said, maybe I should just take the deal, Darius would remember that conference room, that recording, that first no. He would lay out the risks honestly. He would never promise miracles. But he'd also remind them that systems depend on people giving up, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to plead guilty to a lie, even when everyone insists it's your safest option. Back in East Baltimore, kids at the library where he'd once shelved books now argued over who got to sit at Darius's table. The librarian kept a newspaper clipping about his case, pinned to the bulletin board. Some of those kids would stumble, make mistakes, get in trouble. Darius knew that, but he also knew that when they pictured a lawyer, they wouldn't just picture someone from a different world. They'd picture someone who once walked their same cracked sidewalks. One day, he'd return to that library as a guest speaker instead of an employee, standing where he'd once huddled over textbooks alone. He'd tell them what nobody had told him when he was their age, that they were allowed to take up space in rooms that didn't expect them, that knowledge was a weapon no one could confiscate, that preparation could turn them from victims into advocates, whether in a classroom, a courtroom, or anywhere in between. If you take anything from what happened to me, he'd say, let it be this: when people write you off, that doesn't mean they're right. It just means they don't see you clearly yet. He'd smile, watching eyes light up around the room. You don't have to convince everyone. You just have to be ready when the moment comes that requires you to stand up for yourself or for somebody else. That moment had come for him at 19. He knew it would come for them too. And when it did, he hoped they'd remember more than just the headlines. He hoped they'd remember the preparation, the late nights, the quiet choices nobody saw. Because that's where real power lives, not in the dramatic verdict, but in everything that leads up to it. As his story spread, Darius understood he couldn't control how people used it. He could only keep living it honestly, case after case, choice after choice, letting his work speak louder than anyone's assumptions. So if you've ever been told you don't belong or treated like your future was already decided, hear this clearly. Your circumstances aren't the author of your life. Your response is, when the world underestimates you, let that become your fuel. Study harder. Question more. Speak up anyway. And when they finally realize how wrong they were about you, make sure it's too late for them to put you back in the box they built. Lesson 1. When the system forgets your humanity. If you are in your late 60s or 70s, you have seen this country promise justice more than once and break that promise just as often. Darius's story may remind you of newsreels from the 1960s or of neighbors who were good kids until a badge and a pen said otherwise. In that Baltimore courtroom, a 19-year-old in his father's suit stood toe-to-toe with men who believed his future was already written: prison, regret, silence. Yet by refusing the easy plea and insisting on the truth, he proved something older Americans have always known in their bones. The system can be wrong. When it is, it takes courage, not comfort, to push back. Lesson 2. Preparation turns underestimation into power. Many of you worked double shifts, raised families, and saved pennies in coffee cans. You understand sacrifice. Darius and his mother lived that same story. All those late nights at the public library, all those law books instead of ball games, looked like overdoing it until the moment everything was on the line. Then that preparation became a shield. He exposed lies, timelines that didn't match, money that changed hands in the dark. For those of us with gray hair and grandchildren, his victory is a reminder and a challenge. We still have wisdom, time, and voices that matter. When we mentor a young person, vote, serve on a jury, or simply refuse to look away, we help make sure the next Darius doesn't have to stand alone at that defense table. If Darius were your grandson, how would his story change the way you see our courts, our police, and your own power at this stage of life? Have you ever faced a moment when saying no to the easy way out cost you sleep but protected your dignity? I'd love to hear your memories, your advice, and your hopes for the next generation in the comments. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today, so more folks your age can find strength and guidance in stories like this one.